Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. The Big Ten heading into 2024 is absolutely loaded, though. We've been on record saying this is probably the best conference in college football heading into 2024. And you got three big dogs at the top: Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon. Friday night, little bit of a roster battle between these three programs heading into 2024. Going to go position group by position group, stack these teams according to the rooms that we like the most. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys. And it truly has been a blast talking these three teams the last couple of weeks, doing deep dives into these position groups. Really excited to get into this one. Cannot thank you guys enough for all the support you guys have shown. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And more importantly, the beauty of college football, the discussion. Obviously, we got a Michigan-Ohio State rivalry. We got a newcomer in the Oregon Ducks. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section how you stack these position groups. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And Dill, let's start with the most important position that we have on the football field, that quarterback room. I'm going to give you the T-box: Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon. Who are you taking?
Frankly, I think this is where Oregon has maybe their most clear advantage in any room.
Ooh.
I think at the quarterback spot. And you like what you have it with Will Howard for sure at Ohio State's played solid football. I just don't think he's hit the level that Dillon Gabriel's hit and played with the consistency that Dillon Gabriel's played with now for a couple straight years. And you just kind of like Michigan, you just have no idea what you're going to get. So that's kind of how I shake it out. I do really like this Oregon room. And I don't think we should all sleep on Dante Moore because he is a freak show. I mean, again, I don't think he's going to be the guy this year, but like he's there in that room. That's a really talented
Well, you
group.
talk about overall quarterback room. It's really hard to argue Ohio State, right? You have a guy like Will Howard, who's played a lot of football at a high level. You have Devin Brown. You have five-star Julian Sain. You have Aaron Nolan.
You have the guy who's proven it like the way Dillon Gabriel has.
100%. You ask me right now, starting quarterback, I'm going to take Dillon Gabriel too. And for a little bit of a different reason that you went to, Dillon Gabriel is just a perfect fit in this Willis-Stein Oregon offense. And you talk about Will Howard at Ohio State. I feel a lot better about Will Howard now that Chip Kelly's running that offense, but I do have some question marks in terms of what Will Howard can do, in terms of what Ryan Day wants to do on offense. I think Will Howard is a very good quarterback, but I'm taking Dillon Gabriel in that Oregon offense. I'm then going Will Howard, and then Michigan. Again, not really sure what we're going to get. No proven production at that quarterback room. Can't really put Michigan anywhere else but in that number 3 spot. Next position group that we have, and this one is an extremely exciting conversation because I think you might be looking at the two best wide receiver rooms in the country in Ohio State and Oregon. I'll open it up to you first. Best wide receiver room of the three.
I think it's really hard to say it's not going to be Ohio State, and that's a projection for sure because Oregon has a little bit more proven players, obviously, with what they have. But you just look at what Ohio State's now done for a handful of straight years, like Jeremiah Smith type guys, Carnell Tate type guys. They just pop out and they play really, really good the second they touch the field. I think it is the most talented unit of those three. I'll narrowly give it to Ohio State just because, again, you look, Evan Stewart and that Oregon, they can go, but I just have a hunch Ohio State's going to do it.
This is where I'm going to go with Oregon. And if you pull me midway through the 2024 season, my answer might be Ohio State. But the way I look at it right now, one, I think Evan Stewart is a sleeping giant. What we saw from him as a true freshman, I think you're looking at one of the better wide receivers that you see in the country. You have Tez Johnson, who, again, super under the radar, was extremely productive, fits right in with that Oregon offense. And Trayshawn Holden, I think Trayshawn Holden's going to have a phenomenal year for the Oregon Ducks. And that proven production as of right now in early March, I'm going to lean Oregon. But Dill, you look at this Ohio State room and you say, all right, 6 weeks into the season, you ask me how I think this shakes out. If Jeremiah Smith kind
of just told me a day ago, like, look at Jeremiah Smith. I mean, this guy's just not built like freshmen are built. I mean, he looks like he's probably going to be really, really good.
I sent you the picture of Jeremiah Smith. He just looks different. This is a generational wide receiver, right? And then you have Emeka Egbuka, who, again, has an argument to be the best wide receiver in college football in 2024. Another guy, Carnell Tate, who, again, flying under the radar, not for Ohio State fans, but maybe nationally because you have a guy like Jeremiah Smith. I mean, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, that has the chance to be one of the more special wide receiver rooms that not only we've seen in 2024, but in maybe the last couple of years. I'm going to go Oregon right now. You ask me midway through the season, that answer might be a little different. Next position group, and then Michigan. Don't want to leave out Michigan. They're in third, I think, comfortably. I'm a Michigan fan, and it's hard to argue that they're even close to Oregon.
It's not built that way at the wide receiver spot.
Now, if we wanted to include Colston Loveland in that conversation, maybe it gets a little bit different. But right now, pure pass catchers have to give props to Oregon and Ohio State. Still, the running back room. And this one, I have my easy answer. Right now, pure running back room, it has to go to Ohio State. They have two of the best running backs in the country in Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Number two, I'm going to go Michigan. I really do like Oregon's running back room too, but I think the depth and I think the different flavors you have in that Michigan running back room, I'll go Michigan. But still, Oregon, you're talking about probably top 15 running back group in the country as well for the Ducks.
I mean, Jordan James is really, really good. I think like he's probably going to take a lot of carries because you just don't know enough about what Noah Whittington's going to give you for a whole season. I do like Jalen Lamar. I think he really does play good football, had a really good bowl game in my mind. So you're interested to see what you have. But I think you're kind of right. I mean, just Michigan with that Edwards-Mullings trend, I think that they both really complement each other well, and I'd probably give them the edge too. And Donovan Edwards obviously popped off in the title game, which is nice to see.
Offensive line. This is a tricky one. I think I'm going Oregon, Michigan, Ohio State. Now I want to pull up. So the Oregon Ducks still, I think this is one of the more non-talked about storylines in all of college football. You pull up this Oregon Ducks offensive line, Josh Conley Jr. I think there's a real reality that in 12 months from now, we're talking about him being a top 10 NFL draft pick. On the other side, you got a Johnny Cornelius, probably going to be a top 100 NFL draft pick. On the inside, Marcus Harper, you have a Pani Lolalu, you add some guards in the transfer portal. I think this Oregon Ducks offensive line is not only the best out of these three right now, but I think potentially one of the best offensive lines in the country in 2024.
No, I mean, the Ducks room is loaded. I mean, you look, you're probably right. You got two tackles who are almost surefire NFL guys in my mind. Really stunned that Johnny Cornelius didn't leave this year. So I'd give them the edge. I think it's pretty comfortable, frankly. And then you kind of go to my number two. I think I have Michigan, and it's Ohio State and Michigan's tough because Ohio State's offensive line didn't play good enough last year. Everybody knows that. Everyone would acknowledge that. Michigan, on the other hand, obviously very dominant, but has to replace everyone. I just think you have a little bit more belief, similar to how you have just belief in Ohio State's ability to develop wideouts. You got a bunch of guys who have been in this program now for a while, especially on that inside. You just really feel like are going to play good football because of the history of what Michigan's done at that position.
I feel like a lot of people are going to write off this Michigan offensive line because on paper you're losing 6 guys to the NFL draft. And what Michigan has done, kind of keeping those guys within the system, I think you're going to see maybe – I'm not going to go as far and say that this Michigan offensive line is going to be as good as we saw in 2023, but I think it's going to be a damn good offensive line. I'm really interested to see what the tackle position shakes out for Ohio State. Defensive line. This is a really tricky one. I'm going to go Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon. And I want to just talk about the conversation here is you talk about starting 4 offensive linemen. I'm for sure taking Michigan, right? Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart on the outside. You have the best 2 interior defensive linemen in Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. But from a depth standpoint, Dill, it's hard not to lean Ohio State. I think that's one of the biggest question marks you have about this group for Michigan is, all right, you got phenomenal starting 4. What does the depth look behind them? And then I think Oregon probably coming in at 3. That's probably the biggest question mark I have about that Oregon Ducks team is on the defensive line. But for Michigan, Ohio State, I think you're looking at some of the best defensive lines that we see in the country.
Yeah, and it'd be really hard for me to say Michigan's not the best one just because simply you're right. I think they have the 2 best players in Kenny Grant and Mason Graham. Mason Graham might be one of the best defensive linemen in the country this year. I mean, they're both really loaded units. I just think Michigan has 2 guys who probably hit more of that star power, more of that maybe first-round level. And again, that's not to say Jack Sawyer came on. If Jack Sawyer has a really dominant year, we might be having a slightly different conversation. Maybe JTT too. And Kenyatta Jackson, I think he's kind of one, like maybe the X factor in terms of being able to complement what they do with Sawyer and be a little bit more or have a little more juice on the edge than what they've had.
Yeah, you talk about like Caden Curry, Kenyatta Jackson Jr., like what do those guys look like going into year 3? That's a massive storyline for Ohio State. And again, Jack Sawyer, JTT, 2 guys that could be first-round NFL draft picks in 2025. And I think the big conversation for Oregon is what are you getting from some of those young pups, right? Blake Purchase, Mateo, you add Jamari Caldwell. through the portal. You have a lot of young talent on Oregon. And again, that could be one of those conversations where, hey, 6 weeks through the season, my take on this Oregon Ducks defensive line might be a little bit different than early March. But I think Michigan and Ohio State, you're looking at two of the best defensive line groups in the country. They'll working to that linebacker spot. And I'm kind of interested to hear your take. I'm going to give you the floor first. Linebacker room heading into 2024, how you stack these teams.
I actually think this is a razor tight kind of matchup, frankly, because you look, I mean, Ohio State lost, obviously, Eichenberg. They lost Steele Chambers, but that's a super talented young core that they have coming up through that, especially with Sonny Styles sounding like he's going to kick down there. I mean, Sonny Styles, CJ Hicks up in the linebacker room, if those two play really good, that's a really dangerous room. I think Michigan's probably slightly more proven just because how good Jayshon Barham was. And Ernest Housen played a little bit. You got to see what he kind of is. But Barham might be the best linebacker in the country in terms of what you've seen on field. And then Oregon is, I think we want to see more. We've talked about this a lot. I think that's a position that they're really talented at. I think Justin Jacobs has the potential to be like that guy. We just need to see Dan Lanning get them playing like he had the linebackers playing in Georgia, being physical, being aggressive, being dominant.
That's the storyline there, I think, is Justin Jacobs, a guy that we have a lot of high aspirations for. Can he put it together? And again, Dan Lanning developing linebackers, you look at back at the time at Georgia, like that's a specialty. If you get those guys playing like Nakobe Dean, Channing Tindall, Quay Walker, you're looking at a special linebacker room. Until this is am I crazy for saying that? I'd probably throw Georgia in this too. Are you looking at the top 3 secondary rooms in the country with Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon? Now, looking at Oregon first, you look at the sheer amount of the talent they have at that cornerback room. They inject Jabbar Muhammad. You have a guy like Jaleel Florence, Dante Manning, Cam Alexander. It's as deep as a cornerback room as you see in the country. I think you look at Michigan and you say, all right, we probably have the best cornerback in the country in Will Johnson. And then Ohio State is also absolutely loaded. I'll ask you first, stacking Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon in the back end, how do you have them?
This is the toughest one because I'm kind of with you. I mean, this might be 3 of the top 5 secondary rooms in the country. You just look with Washington or Oregon, adding Jabbar Muhammad and having that true number 1. You kind of like that is kind of the differentiator would have been between the 3. Now they have their alpha dog. Obviously, Will Johnson's that guy. Denzel Burke is certainly that guy as well. So all 3 have a stud. All 3 have really good, like kind of. I mean, Michigan, obviously, someone's going to need to prove it at that second cornerback spot. But other than that, you look, the safety really looks good there. I think you feel really confident about that nickel role. I think I have Ohio State at 1 just because I think it's a little bit more complete than the other 2, and then maybe Oregon, Michigan, but it's really, really tight.
And it's crazy to say Michigan at 3, but then when you look at Oregon and Ohio State,
it might be 1, 2, 3. I don't know.
It's hard to argue that Michigan's above the rest. Now, I think the one question you have with Oregon is probably the safeties, right? You bring in Kobe Savage through the transfer portal, but the quarterback room, I'd probably lean Oregon. But I think you're right. When you look at the all-encompassing safety or corner secondary room for Ohio State, you bring in Caleb Downs, who, again, one of, if not the best safety you see in the country. I'm going to go Ohio State 1. I'm going to go Michigan 2, and I'm going to go Oregon 3. It's crazy. I think Oregon might have the 3rd best secondary room in the country. I have question marks at that safety spot where you look at Michigan, Ohio State, and say those are probably some of the better safeties that you see in the country. That's probably how you stack it up. Now, Dill, I think all 3 of these teams are probably your preseason picks in terms of winning the Big Ten. We'll see how it shakes out on the football field. Obviously, Michigan replacing Jim Harbaugh, a lot of new coaching staffs. Ohio State and Oregon working in new quarterbacks. Going to be really exciting. I think you're looking at 3 of the best teams in college football. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.